So we're going to take 2 seconds here and we're going to have the character flip. Now, in order to do this, the character is going to end up moving forward. And I'm just going to rotate them as if they were going through the motion. So let's do this in a breakdown manner, actually. So I'm going to go forward, let's say frame 25, and I'm actually going to add a breakdown. So they're going to rotate this way towards camera. They're doing a cartwheel. And they're going to go upside down. So something like this. You'll notice that the arms and legs are following right now. This is because I've set them to be so that the follow line just follows the body. I've also set the feet to follow the body. Honestly, the arms and legs in this don't really matter. You would pose them out, have the arms touching the ground, all of that good stuff. I'm keeping this simple here just for the sake of demo purposes. The big thing that's going to be causing the issues is the main control, the one that we're doing all the flips with. So that's what we're going to be focusing on here. So the character goes through there, and then at the end, let's take this pose, copy it, and they will continue their rotation here, end up back straight, right there. And not only that, they will spin back to face where they were before. Let's get them on the ground here. Okay. So we've got our 3 poses. Whoop, whoop. There we go. It just looks really weird. Now, let me actually take all of my animation here, and I'm going to set it into splines. And we'll keep working on this in splines. So, curves. I'm just going to... No, wait. I want tangents. Tangents. Default is going to be auto and auto. And I'm going to set my curves to splines. Okay. So, we have the character going through. Whee! They do a cartwheel. Now, of course, you would break this down properly. So, for example, as they're going through here, do not rotate the character when you have every single control selected. So they might come through here and they might start rotating their body first before they cartwheel, things like that. This animation is going to be terrible, but we're mostly focused on the concept here and not the actual posing. So we go through there, cartwheel, and they land. Yay. Great. Well, that wasn't too hard. We animated the flip. No problem. There is an issue. And we'll see if we can kind of showcase it right here. But the main issue is that as the character is doing this flip, we are going to be dealing with a gimbal issue. A gimbal issue is what happens when you have 3 axes, the X, Y, and Z, all having all of these extreme rotations and reversing on top of each other. And when you're not used to this, you won't notice that it's happening. Everything looks fine. I have my controls here. I can still rotate them this way. All good. I can rotate them this way. All is perfect. So, how do we deal with this? Yeah, it works fine. Why do we have to deal with it? Well, the problem is that as the character is flipping and they're doing this complex set of motions, what we don't see is the math that's going into this. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with complex rotations like this, the math doesn't always work. So, to kind of showcase this, let's say I want this character here. Maybe I want a little bit of more of a hold in the cartwheel. So maybe at this point, I want the head to just kind of be a little lower right here. Like so. Okay, that's not so bad. It does that, but see this? How he kind of gets that there's a little wiggle in there. Oh, weird. That's not so bad. I can deal with that. But what if, as they're doing this, we also want to maybe have the hips spin a little faster as well, just in this segment. So as they kind of reach the peak, they're spinning with their hips before they launch themselves out. We're starting to feel a little bit more of a wiggle. What if I want to keep them a little straighter too? So I'm just starting to add all of these little elements in. And if you watch the neck, it's going to be hard to see, but the neck is starting to get these weird little rotations. And what's happening is if you look at your rotation channels, they're going to start affecting each other in weird ways. So, for example, if I take my rotate Z here and start moving it, let's kind of move it a lot here. See what's happening with the other curves? How they adjust themselves? Let's take our rotate Y. See that? How the rotate X changed quite a bit right there? As I'm adjusting this, all of the other curves are starting to adjust each other as well. This is gimbal lock. And what's happening is when you have 3 axes and you start rotating them, there will be a point where 2 of the axes line up with each other. So to prove this, what you can do is take your main control here, right click on it and go to gimbal mode when you're in the rotations. And you'll notice that all of a sudden these rotations are a little crooked from what they were before. And as we go through this, there will be a point, so this is where we're going to get that gimbal lock right here. See how the Y and the X are almost in line? This means that if I want to make a little change, so let's switch back to object mode and we'll do the same thing that we were doing before. You know, at this flip, I just want to take my Y curve and I just want to bend it a little bit here. Look at my graph editor. Which curve changed the most? The X curve. If I want to make them go a little bit more this way, okay, that's fine. Yay, 1 curve, perfect. Then this way, oh, let's add a little bit more rotation. All 3 axes have just changed a huge amount, specifically the X, which means that as we're going through here, see how the head is kind of pausing and then going down? You get these wiggles. That is gimbal lock. Your rotation manipulators, the actual manipulator, the individual X, Y, and Z, 2 of them are overlapping. Now in this case, because our animation is so janky to begin with, it doesn't seem like a huge deal. It's like, okay, I can polish this. But when you're trying to get that final polish, making sure all the spacing on the eyes, the nose, the head, the fingers, all of that is working, these little wiggles where all of these controls are fighting each other is going to be a nightmare to deal with. You are going to fight it and it's going to be horrible. There will be times when you're trying to animate every single frame, dealing with all the rotations, tracking every arc, and it is nightmarish. I've done that many times. It is not fun. So how do we avoid this? How do we approach this properly? These complex motions, when we've got to have a character do a flip or a complex spin, how do we do it in a way to avoid this in general? And what do you press again? Oh, do you mean to switch? To switch the manipulator, I'm hitting Control Shift or Command Shift if you're on a Mac, and then right clicking. And this allows you to switch your manipulator to different modes very quickly. So let's review this animation and see how we can do it better. So the main issue is that as we're animating, we have all of these controls that are, or these 3 manipulators that are all fighting each other in order to get this flip to work. And that is a pain. That's going to automatically give you gimbal. Now you could try to change the rotation order. We're not going to cover that today, but that'll help in some cases, specifically if you're dealing with one rotation more than another. So for example, a wave, you're dealing with one axis much more than all the others. But in a case of a flip like this, you're using all 3 axes kind of throughout. And you might get better results with one versus another, but it can still be tricky. And especially if you're not sure how to switch those, it can kind of be a pain. So instead, what we can also do, it is a viable option, switching your rotation order. And actually, let's just actually show that. To do that, you just go to your attribute editor, and then under your control curve here, There's the rotation order. You'd set a key on that, right click, key selected, and then you could change it. We're not going to talk about this in depth. I'll do another demo on that at another point, just because we can go into a lot of different things on that. But let's say we want to just do this flip. There's a few different ways you can do it. The first, and this is kind of the first I will approach, you can key a rotation order switch. Yeah, so you just right click, again, right here, set key, and then you'd switch it right there. So you can actually key the rotation order, which is, you won't see it actually keyed, but you can key it. So the way I typically approach something like this, there's a few different ways. If I'm approaching my animation and I don't have too much that needs to be changed, my typical approach is going to be dealing with a gimbal control. Now, not all rigs have gimbal controls, so this will be dependent on your rig. I'm going to show a few different workflows here. But let's say we've got our animation all fresh, ready to go. And actually, I'm just going to take all my animation and buffer it so we can get back to this if we need to. Boop. Right there. So get rid of that animation. It's gone now. Haha. So we're ready to animate this, and we know, aha, we've got a flip coming in our future. So what I need to do is I need to split the rotations. The reason why we get gimbal lock is that you have 3 axes that are all working together, and at some point 2 of them are going to overlap. So the way we avoid this is we animate on 2 different layers, 2 controls that are working to get this flip done. So for example, in this case, and on many rigs, if I select the cog here, there is a gimbal cog. If I turn this on, we get a secondary control right here. And this control will allow us to kind of move the character forward with the main one and make small adjustments with the middle one. And it just kind of follows along. So what this means is I can start layering in my animation. And the way you approach this is you just want to make sure that your main rotation is done on the bigger control, and then the smaller rotations, the minor rotations, are done on the secondary control. So, for example, if I was to animate this flip, I'm splitting my axes. So, we're going to do the same thing. So on frame 25, I'm going to have my rotate X here. So I'm going to take my main control, and I know that the character is going to flip. So they're going to go forward, and whoop, I'll just rotate this right there. I'm just flipping this upside down, and I'm not using any other axis right there. So flip there. Then as he gets through, we'll finish this off. You can almost say this is like a layered method of animation. So, oops. There we go. 360. Ta-da! There we go. So, we've got that first animation, and we've just got this. One axis right on there. Now, we could add in our y-axis on top of here, or we could separate it out on the other one. So I can take this secondary control, the cog, and this is the one that I'm going to add the spin on. So halfway, the character, he starts over here. So he's going to be spinning this way. Okay. Just making sure I have the right direction. Okay. So I animate the rotate Y on this axis, like so. And then let's finish that off, and he's going to be over this way, like so. Now we've got this spin going on, and the controls are totally separate. So my rotate X If I need to adjust anything in the spacing of the flip here, maybe add a little bit more of a hold, or maybe make it a little faster, let's add a little bit of a hold here. I can just take that rotate X, and you'll notice there's no rotate Y, no rotate Z. It is perfectly nice and clean. I can just clean that up, get the perfect polish I want just on the spin. If I need the twist, I go back to my gimbal cog, and I can add a little bit more twist here, maybe have it go a little faster in the middle, right there. And I can polish this, no problem, and I know that they're not affecting each other where I tweak a key on one and it's adding keys on another curve, or that I need to animate two curves just to get one thing working. So this is going to be a pain. Or sorry, this is going to be much better, but it's still kind of a pain in a few different ways. That's what I was trying to go for. So this is better. Definitely much better. It will make your life way easier in the polish phase. So much better. But there is still an issue with this. And it's not so much a big issue, but as we're animating this, we no longer have gimbal lock, but we're not using the gimbal control to its maximum. What makes a gimbal control so powerful? So right now we've got this character cartwheeling, and as they're doing this, maybe they're doing like a jump in order to get to the cartwheel, you would have an arc to the hips. And as they spin, their hands are up, you would have some sort of arc. So if you imagine the characters on the ground, as they do this, there should be some sort of arcing motion going through. We don't see that here. The character is just moving straight right across, kind of boring. So as an animator, I would have to go in here and, okay, start building in an arc. So have the character go up a little bit more here. Oops, make sure I set that on the right key. Now, is this bad? No, not at all. Like, that's totally fine. So we can add just a little bit of an arc there. Yay. A tiny little bounce there. Is that a big deal? Not at all. But, like I said, we could use the power of the gimbal control to make certain things even easier for us. And this is especially true for swings or flips like this, where you want a very specific arc, especially if the character is contacting the ground. So their hands are contacting the ground, and we want a nice clean arc. So let's do this in a slightly different way. So the first one, split the axes. That's the best thing to do. That'll get you most of the way for most shots. The next way is, as we animate this, we're going to go to the frame where he's going to do the flip, and instead of just using the gimbal cog, I should say, as an extra twist, we can use this as an offset. So I know, let's actually create a locator here. Okay, create locator. There we go. I'm going to use this as a marker. This is where the character's hand is going to be placed on the ground. You would kind of figure this out in your blocking. So I know that my character's hand has to go boop, right there on the ground. And I want him to flip over that point. Okay. Well, I can take my gimbal cog here. And let me make sure I select the right one. Right there. And you can see that if I move this, I can change the positioning of where my cog is in relation to the character. So let's kind of do a simple example here. What if your character is holding onto something and has to swing from his shoulders? Or maybe someone grabs him by the neck and he's just hanging there and he's like swinging and swaying and this big brute is just holding him by the neck. How would you animate that? Okay, I'll take my cog, animate. Well, now the neck's out of the hand and I have to counter animate a ton. It is a pain. Yeah, unless you animate on ones, exactly. Or I take my gimbal cog, I'll offset it so that the cog the main one, is now in the correct position. Just move that back up. And now when I rotate this, oh, look at that. He's rotating from his neck. So now I can have the character struggling in this guy's arm or in his hand, and he's just being held right there. If I need this character to swing, maybe he's like jumping, doing a parkour shot, and just catches a pipe and swings across. I can bring this up higher to where his hands would grab. Right around there. And now as I rotate him, just getting him out of the ground here, he is spinning from the top there. So I can just have him grab on and then whoop, done. You get the nice perfect arc with literally one rotation versus translation and rotation and offsetting and readjusting. It's a pain. It is a little weird to set up at first because it kind of, as animators, we typically just kind of keep a control in one spot. Like it's the hip control. It stays at the hips. We don't move the hip control off to the side, then it's not a hip control anymore. But keep in mind, this is why it's called the cog. The cog is not a hip control, it is the center of gravity. And our center of gravity can change. So for example, if this person is gonna do like a singing in the rain moment where he grabs a lamppost and spins around, I would want that to spin from his hand. So he grabs onto the pole and you just go wee all the way around. Well, I can do that. Put it right to the side where his hand would be, and now wee all the way around. I would just have to take the 1 foot, kind of bring it back to the center here. So it's like balanced where the lamppost would be. And now, wee, he goes all the way around in one rotation. So we can do that. I almost feel better setting up a location or a locator than to offset a control so far out of him. Yeah, so that's the second third workflow that I want to show after this. So the first one is that you can use the cog. And in this case, let's kind of set up the flip here. What I would end up doing is just move the main cog into the position where you want the spin to go. Take this back. And then you'd basically use this to get the character into position. So he'd be upside down like right here. And now I can just use this and go whoop, done. Animate that and you're good. So that's the second method that we can use, is actually offsetting this, not just separating them out. That can be very, very helpful. And this works great for IK controls, for example. A lot of newer rigs, if you look at their IK controls, they also have a gimbal control, which means that if I want a character to grab onto it like a motorcycle and rev the engine, well, by default, you want to use IK so the hand stays in place. But if you rotate the wrist, you get this. Not great. Okay, well, I could do a full constraint and all of that. That would get me the hand into position. But what if I don't want to deal with constraints, or it's just like he's going to grab, rev, and then let go? It's kind of a pain to set up a whole constraint system just for like 10 frames. Or I could turn on the gimbal control, and right there we get another control, same thing. So I can use that to offset the hand a little further back, right there. And then the main control now, boom, we get the rev. With no constraints, no anything, it's all built in. There you go. These types of gimbal controls are fantastic. Not only do they help you avoid gimbal lock in the first place, but they give you extra ways of animating your shot. It is magic. Once you find these out and you start playing around with them, it opens up a ton of possibilities and makes an animation that could have been very complex much simpler. Now, the problem here is not all rigs have gimbal controls. So, yay, great, wow, look at all this magic. But what if you have a rig that doesn't have it? And this happens in productions. This happens especially with free rigs. Not every rig has all of these options. So, how do we deal with that? Well, we can do the same thing by using constraints and locators, or groups, or whatever you prefer. I like locators because we can see them and actually interact with them in the viewport without having to go to the outliner. But we can do the same thing with a locator and some constraints. So, for example, let's say I want this character to, again, do the cartwheel. And hey, Catherine, thanks so much. Aw, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I love this song too much. So I want this character to flip, but I for some reason I don't have a gimbal control on this character. So what I can do is I can set up my own gimbal control. So to do this, we essentially want a main control that will control our character, and then a secondary offset control. So if I'm doing, there's two ways of doing this. There's the temporary way where, okay, I just need to do this for this one little moment here, and then it's done and I'm good. But there's also the, I'm going to animate 100 frames of this, or 200 frames, and I'm going to have my character like dancing. They're going to be spinning all over the place. And I don't want to have a constraint every single time the character goes for a spin and a different locator, and it gets to be a pain. I just want a gimbal control, something that I can use with this character. So you can set up your own. And this is going to be the same method whether you want to animate a character like doing a quick thing or a longer shot. So let's say I want to be able to offset this hip. What I'm going to do is, I usually use locators for this, but for the sake of variety, let's add our own curves. So I'm going to create my own NURB circle. We'll make it nice and big. And you'll notice right off, it's the same color, blue, as this curve right here. That's going to make things a little tricky to see, especially when you want to know what's an original rig control versus what you did. So just a quick tip here, if ever you want to change the color of a locator or a control, just select the object, go into display, drawing overrides in the attribute editor, enable override, and then just change your color index. So let's go hot pink. There we go. There's our hot pink control. Yay, now I know it's mine. So with this, I want to snap it up to the cog. So this is just going to be the initial setup. I'm going to select the cog, then the control. I believe this is the correct order. Go to modify, match transformations, and then match. Oops, wrong order. So control, then that, and there we go. Now you'll notice that its scale got reset. So that's why you can't see it here. If I scale it back up, there we go. So we can do this, and let's name this. I'm just going to call this our main control. And then we'll duplicate this, shrink it down, and we're going to call this gimbal control. There we go. So our main control and our gimbal control. And let's, just for the sake of argument, take our gimbal control and we'll change its color to something else just so we can see. You don't have to do this. This is just me being picky. Let's go, what's a color that's not on the rig? I'm not a fan of, well, we could go yellow. There we go. So big yellow control. There we go. We've got these two. Now, before we do anything else, we've got them in the correct position. We need to freeze the transformations. You'll see that they actually have values in here. This means that if we were to try and reset them, they go down here. No, we want these to be their default position right here. So I'm going to just select both of them, go to modify, not modify, edit, delete by type, history. That just gets rid of any construction history on them. And then modify, freeze transformations. Now my translations and scales are all reset. Done. Now we're ready to start setting this up. So the way I'll set this up is the main control. That's the main one that controls everything. I'll just take my gimbal control and parent it underneath. You can middle mouse drag in the outliner like this, or select the gimbal control, then the main control, and hit P on the keyboard to parent, or go to edit parent to do that. So now we have this, moves along, and we get this nice offset. There we go, like that. Now we can take the main cog control, or the main control for the rig, whether this is an IK control, whatever it is, and I can constrain it to my gimbal control here. So I'll take the gimbal control, then my cog in this case, and I'm just going to go to constrain, parent, open up the options, and make sure maintain offset is turned on. There we go. So has that changed anything? No. But now, as I move this big control here, I can move my character, and I have the same functionality as before, where now I have my own gimbal cog, and I can create all of these offsets. The only difference now is that I'm not animating this original control on the rig. I have my own controls. So if ever you have a rig that doesn't have a gimbal cog, or like these extra controls that give you more power, it is literally this simple to set up. Create a couple of new controls, a constraint, and you're good. And now you can animate the whole shot with this extra level of power. So we can do something like that. Now, one last thing we can do is we can just do a simple constraint for just one moment. So let's say I want this character to do, again, that cartwheel, and I'm just having trouble. Maybe this is especially true when you've already got animation in place. So let's kind of bring back our animation curves here on this character. So the power of buffer curves, haha. Bring that back in if Maya doesn't freeze. There we go. So now we've got our, did I not bring back in my rotations? Nope. For some reason they did not come back in. Oh well, that's fine. That's not hard to fix. So let's say we've got our shot back here, and we've already done some animation. We didn't realize before we started that, oh shoot, I'm gonna get some gimbal lock. As students, we run into this a lot, where you're animating a shot and you don't realize that you're gonna be having some major issues throughout your time working on this, just because of that gimbal lock. You were blocking things in and you just didn't realize. So how do we deal with this? What do we do? Well, when you're doing something like this, you can just activate a constraint and just use constraints to simplify this moment. So let's say, for example, I know that on frame 5 the character starts coming in, and then I need to get this nice simple flip motion on there, and a twist and a spin, and then he lands, and then I'm good there. You can create a constraint setup that will allow you to do that very easily. So there's a few different things you can do for this. We'll just go with the simplest one. You can layer this in lots of complex ways so that you have individual controls over all sorts of different things. But essentially what we want is a pivot point. So we can use this one right here that we created. So we'll call this our pivot locator. And then I'll duplicate it. And this is going to be our, we'll call this our control locator. This is the one that's going to be controlling the character. And from there, basically what I can do is I'm going to snap the locator to the control here so that it matches the position. So let's do that right there. So again, modify, match transformations, and I'm just going to match the translations and then match the rotation so I don't accidentally get rid of the scale. Like so. So it's in place now. I'm going to take this and then I am going to parent it to this locator. So we'll take the control locator, parent it to the pivot. So now if I rotate this, whee, there we go. And I'm going to constrain the character to the locator. So once again, locator, then the control here. And we're just going to do a constraint. So constrain parent. And with that, as I'm animating the flip, I can just do this. Whoop, and he flips over. And as that's happening, I can use this other locator to get any extra little twists or motion in there as the main one is moving him across the screen. So I can animate him basically up to this point here until he gets to there. Use this one, whoop, get him across, and then he finishes with this. And everything is nice and separate and gives me this nice clean motion. So there's a lot of different ways we could approach this. Essentially though, what it breaks down to is you don't want to just use one control. If you're using one control, you're gonna get gimbal lock. When you're dealing with these big complex rotations, it's very tricky and you will reach a point where things don't work quite right anymore and you're gonna have trouble polishing. So doing something like this can be a huge time saver. Now there are other ways you can do this. But one thing I just wanted to show is the power of this. So I've shown this before on stream, but since it's kind of lines up with what we're talking about today, I want to show it here. Now, if I was smart, I would have prepped this because I didn't think I was actually going to show it, and then, yeah, why not? So let me make sure I think this is the right version. Okay. To use this on upper arms too, I feel those tend to lock up a lot. So with the upper arms, if you're animating FK, you can't use an offset locator and constraints like this because you're dealing with an FK control. Instead, you have to use a cog. So you would have to make that cog setup if your rig doesn't have it, or just use the cog on the rig. And you can use that to split out the controls. That's going to be the best way to get it in the upper arm in an FK setup. The other thing that I will do in the arms, typically, and this again depends on if your rig actually supports it or not, is that I will, if I get a gimbal lock in a certain section of my shot, what I will end up doing is I'll just snap all of my keys in that section to IK, if your rig allows for FK IK snapping, and then just animate that section in IK. So if I'm getting a little gimbal lock and it's making like a wiggle in the arm and I just can't get rid of it, switch it to IK, snap it, and then just clean up your arcs and you're done. And then it goes back into FK when everything is fine. That works really well and is super fast. So the big thing for me is I'm just not afraid of switching from FK to IK or IK to FK if I need to. And it speeds up your workflow, gets clean results. So let's get this open here. I reset my preferences, so I have to find all of my folders again. I don't have shortcuts to them anymore. Let's see, there we go. And the blur. Okay. So open this up. So when you talk about gimbal lock, do you also use the gimbal object rotation feature from the tool settings? I almost never switch the gimbal mode in the rotation settings. I always either use world or object rotation. I used to use gimbal, but honestly, gimbal rotation, so like switching it here. So if I'm going to rotate something, switching to gimbal mode versus object or world, it's nice because it shows you if you've gotten gimbal lock or not. But when I'm moving something, I know I just want to move it up or down, left or right, whatever. I don't want to have to try and fight this gimbal control to get the very exact axis I want. To me, it's more of a waste of time. I just want to get the pose that I want, and then the animation should work with it. And this is where making sure you offset things correctly makes a huge difference. So this was an animation we had done on stream a while back. So we'll just play through it here, see how well it plays. Actually, the playback's not bad. So this is something we did on stream, and we've got all of this spinning. So we just talked about how one spin can start getting you gimbal lock. Now you've got this staff here. I don't even know. I never actually counted how many spins it has. But there's a lot of spins in here. When I first animated this, there was no gimbal controls on this. The staff is just a staff. There's nothing too elaborate on it. So, as I animated it, what ended up happening, let's see, right through here. Let's see, I'm just trying to find where my constraint turns on and off. As I was animating this and trying to get the spin to work, we were trying to deal with a lot of gimbal issues. So let me turn that off here. Oops. No, there we go. So as the staff spins, is this the version we had? Yeah. So you can see here at the beginning, oh look, yeah, it's not bad. It's moving, it's working. Ah, not bad, not bad. And then when it gets about halfway, see how the staff is just going crazy? It's just like wiggling and shaking around. It doesn't work at all. That was the original pass. When I went to splines, that's what I got. And if we look at the curves here for the rotations, the reason why it works at the beginning is I went frame by frame to try and get it to work. So one frame at a time. And you'll notice, and this is the problem with gimbal lock, is that the curves don't make sense, which is why it's almost impossible to polish unless you're animating it frame by frame. This staff is just supposed to be rotating in one direction. Think of a clock. It's just spinning in one direction with a few little variations. But if we look at our curves, they're going up and down and up and down and up and down. There's like this bump here for no reason. Why are the curves like, why is there a bump here? You would think, oh, that should get a better spin. But no, it's going to screw up everything. Euler filter is not going to help with this. This is a common misconception, actually. Euler filter doesn't actually fix gimbal lock. Euler filters fixes a 360 flip, which is actually a little different. So when you get true gimbal lock, an Euler filter won't do anything. And this is the frustrating part, because we're kind of taught early on that, hey, if you've got a gimbal lock, use the Euler filter. Yay, it works. But it's a different tool for a different scenario. So for example, let's say we've got an object here and it's going to just tilt to the side. So we go this, whoop, it just tilts right there. Now, the thing with this tilt is that on any frame, I could take this and then spin it 360 degrees. And I should have used a cone for this. Let's actually, I don't have to switch it to cone. I'm just going to select my vertices here and scale them so that way we can see a point to it. So on this point here, at this key, I could spin this all the way around. And if we look at our keys, hey, no difference. It's just moving normally. Yay, great. But if we were to actually scrub through, it's just spinning like crazy. That's because we accidentally got a flip. The controls spun so fast that now it's not going to run correctly. So what an Euler filter does is you select your curve, and then in the graph editor you go down to curves, Euler filter. It's spelled Euler, but it's pronounced Euler based on a mathematician. If you click on this, it takes your keys and it removes all of those 360-degree spins. Now it works correctly. So it just goes through and looks for any curve or any keys that it kind of is going too far and then back. That's what it's doing. That does not fix gimbal lock. These types of spins can be a result of gimbal lock, but it's not going to solve the actual original issue. So just a point of clarification there. It's not a bad tool and it's always worth trying, but there will be many times like this one here where Euler filters will do nothing. It's just going to be pointless. You're going to hit the button and go, why, Maya? Why? You betrayed me. So it's in this case isn't going to do nothing on any of the axes. It's not going to help. So let's see, what about Quaternion, or are Quaternions nightmare to animate with? So Quaternion is another rotation mode. Blender has that. I don't think Maya has it, or at least I've never used it in Maya. It's just a different rotation mode. Some people like it, some people don't. It's just what you're used to. So it's not bad. It's preference, really. If you're used to normal rotations, then yeah, it can be a real pain. If you're used to Quaternion, then this is going to be a pain. Okay, it does have it. Yeah, I'll have to look into that, do some testing on it. So we look at our curves here with our original control, and where is that original control once again? This is such a mess of different overlapping controls here. I think it's that one. There we go. So like we were saying before, the curves make no sense, and no matter what, you're gonna be fighting this frame by frame. So once I blocked this out, I basically just went, okay, go to the point where my animation starts to break, where the gimbal lock is just ruining everything. And I did exactly what I showed before. I made my own rig. I made my own kind of gimbal cog setup. So if we look at this, I actually have two controls. I have, well, yeah, two controls. So I have one specifically for my rotate X, another specifically for my rotate Z. So I could have called this like the main control and then the cog control or whatever. I just labeled them as, okay, this one's going to control my rotate Z, this one's going to control my rotate X. Done. And I just set this up, and because of that, I animated each one separately. They don't interact with each other, they just kind of follow along. And now when I turn that constraint on that connects the staff to those new controls, I can just take these and look at my rotate X. Nice and simple. Nice and clean. Rotate Z, look at that. Let's compare that to the original rotate Z. We'll select both of these, rotate Z. So you have the original one in white. Keys on ones all the way through, and then down and up and down and up, and it's like it's bouncing all over the place. Why? It's a clock. It should just be spinning in one direction. It shouldn't flip in any way. It should just keep going. My new curve, it just keeps going in one direction. Yes, there's slowdowns and speed ups, but I want that. I want it to have moments where she holds before she spins again faster. Look at that, nice and clean, just one simple direction. That's it. So I did this on stream, and I remember when I was animating on ones, it took me, I forget how long to animate. Oh, there's something weird here happening. I think I messed up. Oh yeah, I messed up my constraint key. I just switched the key instead of actually. Yeah, see, don't do that. I want to make sure the key is on the whole time. There we go. So the first one took, I think, like 2 or 3 hours. Was it that, or did I just spend an hour? I might have spent an hour just keying on ones, trying to get it to look decent, to look okay. And I only got halfway. Once I created the constraint setup, which took a little time and a little like just setting up, I was able to not only finish the animation, but polish the staff with like perfect spacing in like less than an hour. So all of this complex motion and this nice like ease at the end with a little overshoot, less than an hour to do because I had one simple control that I can just animate the spin, get the exact ease I want, done. So that's the power of this setup. It takes something that would normally be a gimbal lock nightmare and just gives you the controls to get it exactly what you want, nice and perfect. And this applies to a character, it applies to a staff, it applies to something like a pen in the hand, something like this. Anything that has to do with a lot of spins, you can use a setup like this to simplify. The big thing is it takes practice, because when you're new to a setup like this, it can be weird to add new controls to a rig or to offset a cog, for example, things like that. But once you're used to that, it makes these types of workflows much faster and you fight the program so much less. That's the big thing to me, is I hate fighting Maya. I hate fighting any program that I'm working with. So if I can make a setup that will allow me to just not fight anything and just get it done, I'd rather spend a little time on the setup phase than to brute force my way through, especially for a long sequence. Like this whole thing takes like almost 100 frames here, about 75 frames. I don't want to fight these rotations for 75 frames and you make one little change somewhere and then you have to redo everything. It's a nightmare. So hopefully that makes sense. I definitely recommend trying this out. Just do a simple little exercise where you take a staff and try to do a spin, a complex spin, not just one direction like a propeller or a clock, but have it kind of, as they're spinning it, it's changing direction as well, and try to polish that up, and then try to do a simple rig like this and make a huge difference. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully it makes sense. I know it was kind of like more of a concept demo today versus an actual practical let's do this kind of demo, but hopefully it still makes sense. So I guess with that, unless there's any other questions on this, we can probably move on to the breakdowns in our previous shot. And let me actually catch up with the chat, make sure I didn't miss any questions. If I did miss questions, feel free to repost them. I do not mind. Let's see. Kenny Roy's How to Cheat Maya taught me how to truly understand and work with gimbal lock, and I haven't touched an Euler filter since. Yeah, so Kenny Roy actually had a few lectures at Animation Mentor a long time ago, and he talked about a little bit of that when I was a student, which that kind of led me down this whole path. But yeah, Euler filters they are useful. They are not a tool that it should be in your repertoire, but in terms of gimbal lock, is really not going to do much other than fixing a side effect of the gimbal lock. It's not going to actually fix the gimbal itself. Let's see, are you switching some constraints in the hands to do this, or are you just faking it? So what I'm doing here is the hands are just constraining to the staff. I am not constraining the staff to the hands. So I just animated the staff going in the exact arc I wanted, and then the hands are just like switching and then snapping on, and then they hold on, and then they let go, and they are following the staff. This makes it so that I get the perfect arcs of the staff, and because this is what we're watching as an audience, we're watching this big complex spinny thing. It makes it so that it makes it very easy to polish. If I tried to animate the hand and rotating the hand to get the spin of the staff, it would just be a nightmare. So yeah, there are constraints, but it's the hands being constrained versus the actually, did I even constrain the hands? I might not have, actually. Did I? Let's see. Okay, wait, maybe I did. Did I? Actually, I might not have. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's what it was. Originally, I did have constraints. And then what ended up happening was that the hands were just moving so fast, so far, that I had to kind of reanimate the hand on the staff anyway. So I just put it into position where it needed to be. And then you have moments like this where the staff spins in the hand. So I just kind of put the hand to match. Yeah, I forgot about that. We had started with constraints and then just hand keyed it. This way we can get the little offsets and the slides more easily without having to turn things on and off. Honestly, both ways work. It's just a slightly different workflow, especially for something this fast.